I'd like to start with the question of the general questions I can ask you. From your perspective, how can the PhDs and the ECRs balance their teaching and research? This is I know this is a very general question, but we have been struggling for.
Okay, who wants to go first?
You want to go first?
I mean, happy to go first. I think, we all know there's a clear tension there between teaching and research, and I think it really depends as well the type of contract you're on. Some PhD students are expected to teach a huge amount of time anyway. Others kind of fight to get any kind of teaching experience, so you all know what experience you have. And as early career researcher as well, if you're on a postdoc, if you're more research contract, teaching might be a nice break, or it could be that you're on a teaching only contract where you teach way too much and you have no time for your research. So we all have very, very different experience on this. But I guess a lot of people would see teaching as time away and sometimes a very difficult thing to do as time when you would prefer be researching. Especially as well because as PhD students and an ECR, you often don't pick what you end up teaching on, and it's rarely very closely connected to your research. On the other hand, I do think you have a lot of opportunity there to make it work for you. So first thing is, I think once you are, for me in a way, the teaching, we all know this kind of representation of your PhD research as this kind of tiny niche where you're kind of really being this big expert in this tiny topic. And teaching forces you to step a bit away from your niche and to understand how that is relevant to the broader field, or perhaps even to completely different subdisciplines, And so it also means that you end up having to read from other disciplines or from other topics, and you don't end up just being an expert in your topic, but being able to present your topic and how it fits with the broader kind of area. And I do think that is one thing that we often struggle during our doctoral research, is this kind of being also able to speak to the broader discipline and to debate in the broader discipline. And some of the a good way to get into that, I think, is in terms of reflecting on your teaching, and through the choices you make in terms of teaching, you end up telling your students what matters and what doesn't matter that much in a specific area, right? And that is a key skill for you to have when you're writing your PhD and when and afterward as well in terms of research. So it helps situate yourself and think where you stand. Do you like the field you're in? Do you want to change it profoundly, or are you actually quite happy with the way things are? It also, I think, it is sometimes easier to spot good academic writing and good structure and all that if it's a topic you don't care that much about. If you're not as interested in the findings and how they're going to potentially influence what you're going to do, you can take a step back and think, oh, this is actually really well-written literature review. Oh, wow, that is a good research question. And these are things that often we don't take the time to do, and that can really help us improve our own academic writing. So reading things are not of massive interest to you just because you have to read them and they're on the reading list for your students and you need to be able to explain them. Suddenly you get better at academic writing. So I guess for me, teaching as well for PhDs and ECRs is one of these things where, again, step away from that niche and you get better at explaining very complex ideas to students. And so then that also means that you'll hopefully get better at explaining your own complex ideas when you're kind of polishing them off. And that is definitely a core academic skill that you need to build on. So that's for me, I think, on that first question. Who wants to go next?
Should I continue?
Yeah.
So, as mentioned also by Phyllis, I work at communication science, and I'm a political scientist by my PhD education. So I have to teach what also Kuhn was referring to in the previous session. I have mostly to teach methods because my chair is the methods chair. And you think that teaching methods, it's kind of a boring subject where everything is given. So I teach both lectures on statistics, on data analysis, and lectures on research design, for example, teaching students how to write research papers or how to do a literature review. And here I learned, I think 4 or 5 years ago, when we had another DTA session from one of the speakers, that if you have to teach with broader subjects, where you think you don't have a connection to your research, try still to turn it around for yourself. So what I'm doing, I'm working on electoral politics and party politics. So what I'm doing with my students who are in communication science, I'm still picking the databases which we analyze, for example. We have to do exercises, so I'm picking the databases that I find interesting for myself. So I find databases like, I don't know, CSS data, candidate survey, where you have a lot of stuff about communication as well, where you have questions about, I don't know, use of Facebook, use of social media, which comes across very nicely with the students nowadays. You can imagine communication science, misinformation, fake news, all these things are coming on top of the list. So these are the sessions where social media, these are the sessions where people really get engaged. So I just decided that I'm still picking the data which is interesting for me, where I can work a little bit, but I turn it around. And that's what I do as well with the research design, because when I was asked to teach the courses, I'm lucky actually that we basically have the prerequisite, you have to teach research design. How you do it, it's up to you. And where I still go into my old teaching when I was a teaching assistant. So I started from that slides and elaborated and doing election campaigns communication. Or when I thought I would like to read something more, some more stuff for my own research on social media. So what do? Next year when I have to do a literature review seminar for the bachelors where they have to write a literature review, I just design a course on social media. And this way you learn something what contributes to your research. You are reading something, in this case also, that might be interesting for you anyway, and you have a chance to expand your field, because also coming back to what we have before in the discussion, you also learn from the students. And I actually can say that I learned from the students, especially last year, a lot. We have lots of students who work on gender-related topics and kind of gender campaign communication. We have lots of students who are working on this information filter bubble. So there was indeed one of the presentations in the end where I learned a term that I have never heard about. And I learned from my students because, of course, once they start working, explore the literature, they come back to you, bringing even more information than maybe you know. So here I think the main advice would be also to think about how you turn it around a little bit, either to learn something new or step into the fields you are not really familiar with, if you have to teach something you are not familiar with at all, or whether you could turn around even this kind of boring things that we talk about, the methods teaching, the statistics that most of us have to teach in the early stages, and that actually, according to many people, also can bring you jobs, because there are always people willing to hire people teaching methods. So you can turn it around, how you can choose the data that's interesting for you, even if you are discussing the statistical topics, how you can choose, then you explain regression, how you can choose an example which is interesting for you. Because it's up to you to choose the examples. You shouldn't follow the textbook all the time. You can find the example from your research. You can find the papers from your research field. So you can have this balance, and you should also think in the beginning especially of whether you are ready to design the full course or whether you will rather look around for best practices, ask around, and kind of compose something together. Because this is also a big question. When you start, you think, I have a lot of time to design the stuff, and then it takes you a lot of time to prepare everything from the scratch. So try to reuse the things from your research, maybe even from the courses you attended that you liked before, and also to think which kind of data, for example, you can insert, which kind of readings you can take, and whether you would like to explore something new. I think that worked pretty well for me, and I really enjoy actually teaching these courses, although for me it was kind of a different field and different point of view from the students.
Right, so I would like to say that, for some of us, after 11 years in the same university, we're still teaching the research methods. So it doesn't really matter if you are starting your career or you are some way through it. But for me was also quite a challenge. I mean, as a PhD student, I always used to look out for the teaching opportunities, primarily for two reasons. One, because no matter what my research load would be or my field work or anything else, I still had the opportunity to interact with people, okay? And if this is your thing, then teaching is something you should definitely do while you are still in the training side of things. And as much as research is important in getting an academic job, so is teaching. So effectively, the art is to try and balance, you know, your research obligations on the one side and your sort of teaching training on the other side. So therefore, I think we need to be smart in the way that we combine the two. So, as we heard before, to bring in parts of your research and sort of explain some of the concepts and some of the ideas using things that you are reading on your PhD, or that you used during your PhD, or that you are using yourself in terms of your PhD output. I think that's really important. And in parallel, things like training certificates and higher education certificates are important as well, because they actually put you in this kind of direction to think about the way you balance your obligations and the way you actually balance your own teaching material. So I would say that we need to be smart about our teaching. And yes, we all had lecturers and professors and teachers that we liked and we enjoyed, and therefore my philosophy has always been, you know, don't try to reinvent the wheel. What was the two things that the person you liked the most you know, did, and you were able then to transfer to your students later on? And what were the worst things you had? So think of your worst teacher and try not to replicate that person. So, you know, there are already tested recipes on how to do things. So I think it's important not to try to reinvent the wheel. Now, people think that not everyone is cut out for teaching. That's not true. Some people have a little bit of a more natural, let's say, inclination towards explaining things and storytelling and sort of being a little bit more, let's say, lively in a classroom. I remember in a job interview, I got a comment that I was too flamboyant for our students. That's what they said. So I'm like, okay, if you have boring students, then you're not my cup of tea as well. So, you know, not everyone, or people think that not everyone is cut out for teaching, but teaching is something that requires skills, and you acquire them only if you actually get into the classroom and you test yourself on certain things. And it's equally important for our research purposes, because you master some skills around public speaking, you learn to handle crowds, you learn to handle people's faces, which is very important. Do they absorb your ideas? Do your ideas come across? Are you explaining things in a sufficient way? So that's also helpful for conferences, right? So, you know, doing a lecture or doing some sort of lecture-oriented exercise is the same thing as presenting in a conference. You know, we've all been in a conference where we hear someone and we're like, oh my God, you know, let me just check on Twitter whether something was posted, or, you know. So, you know, oops, I revealed the tricks of the trade. But it happens, right? So we need to get ourselves, you know, in the habit of explaining things, of showing people arguments, directions of travel, and so on. So as far as the kind of balance, we are also able to put some of our research skills into practice as well. So when we are seeing students' research questions in their essays, in their projects, when we have to advise students on how to get a direction in their own work, we can reflect on our own work as well, right? So, you know, the things that we get from our supervisors and our colleagues for our research, we also put it into practice, you know, when we are advising students. So it's part of the training deal, and I think it makes a difference, you know, when you finish your PhD, to have this as well, because you also learn in advance how to balance your academic life later on. The majority of academic contracts include both teaching and research at the same time. Yeah. So we need to understand how those two work in parallel, because during a semester we will always be called to devote certain time to our teaching obligations, and we will also need to devote certain time to our research obligations. And to be able to balance this, to juggle all these things together, is an important skill that you can learn and you can master throughout. And then once you are into the famous, career, then you also have developed a certain portfolio of material that you can use and build on. So even if you start a module from scratch, a course from scratch, it's not from scratch. You've actually seen how you can organize it. You've seen how you can play around with different reading lists and materials and so on, and you're able to do an even better job. So because the question was also about PhD versus ECRs, right? So the PhD side, yes, you can still sort of experiment a little bit because you are on the training side, but once you are on the early career researcher stage, so when you're starting your career, the needs are different because the expectations out of you change because you are actually employed by a university who is then responsible and accountable towards the students. So that may sound even more of an overwhelming than stepping into the classroom for the first time. So so there are different needs that we need to respond to, and obviously the research obligations increase as you go further into your career. But if you have the right foundations from the get-go and you've managed to find that golden sort of point that you feel happy about this, then I think it's great. But the most important thing, and as a take-home message, about being smart in the way you prepare your material, in the way that you prepare your teaching, so that when you get to teach it next time around, you don't have to do it all over. So one of the things that I do is that the majority of the slides and the notes are not time sensitive, right? Therefore, I can sort of keep them for a couple of years, and then sort of refresh a few bits and pieces, or change the order, but not having to prepare the whole structure of the class from scratch. Or keeping yourself up to date with the latest sort of material that comes out in this specific module and so on, saves you a little bit of time from having to revisit a reading list every year and every time. So smart things, pick out what is going on. And the final thing, usually at the PhD level, we are called to teach first year students, and maybe we are called to teach on a subject that we don't know anything about. Good news, they don't know more than you do anyway. So the time and effort you invest in the knowledge side can be smaller than the effort you put in the actual preparation of a nice activity or a nice sort of discussion that you can have with the students and so on, or managing the classroom. So people are afraid of touching a new module because they don't know about it. But frankly speaking, even if you attend the basic lecture that the person who is responsible for that module is giving, you are probably able to pick out certain concepts and ideas that you can then transfer into a seminar activity in the classroom. So, we build our knowledge step by step, and there is nothing to be afraid of. The balance can happen. That's the message.
Ask especially about the reflecting your own knowledge to the students, because we feel so insecure about in front of the class sometimes, because we say, oh, I don't know the topic, especially for the statistical methods class. Sometimes you can get most interesting questions from the students, and you would like to answer, you would like to respond, but sometimes you can't be so smart enough to answer, or say, oh yeah, it's a very interesting question, let me look at later. That's
okay
the
to say that.
There is
most of the
always
issue that I have seen for the PhDs, also the early career researchers. We would like to answer as much as we can. I need to prove that I know something else. But because we are in between, showing us that we are the boss of these classes, or the taking the balance. Don't take me so seriously. I mean, not. I use the this word. Taking the balance is a very much struggling way for the ECRs. That's why it's so important.
The thing is, you also develop as you go along, so you don't have to start from being perfect in class one. You know, I mean, okay, for research methods, maybe you have to know a few things, fine. I accept that. But still, the students you are teaching are not as well versed as you anyway. Therefore, you can take the time to learn with them rather than teach them, you know, from the start. So, you know, what my colleague suggested, you know, like, this is a great question, let me look it up for you.
Yeah.
We are not moving encyclopedias, by no means, you know. We are also learners.
Actually, coming back to the previous session when we talked about making students ask questions. So what I quite often also do, because I teach in international setting in the international masters, and in some cultures you have to be also cultural sensitive in the sense that in some cultures people are too shy to ask questions. So you have to encourage them, because they kind of, when we talk to students, we say that they feel like a failure if they ask questions. So they also have this kind of insecurities coming to the master's level, for example, that they think that they have to be pre-selected where. So you should encourage them to ask questions as well. It should provide, I think, lots of, I think I have like forum sessions where on Moodle where they can ask questions. I'm open for the questions online always, and I always ask them whether they have questions. And I actually see that it works this way very well, because for some it's easier to write a personal email, for some it's easier to come in between the breaks, because we came back to the hybrid teaching, so I have some students online, some in class. And I always encourage them to ask questions, and of course where our response, but we don't know the answer, but we will look into it and provide an answer later, or we will discuss this question later, because sometimes they ask questions that that will come up slightly later. But also they're like telling them that there is no stupid question, as I heard quite a lot in my studies, encouraging them to think about the things, maybe also to look into the answers. And sometimes I have a situation that I say, we will discuss it next time, and then just recently in the break, student comes to me, I googled it, I already know the answer. So you have to develop, like, you are trying to develop this culture, because as I completely agree with what Kuhn said, we are aware not only to teach them the material, but rather to teach them to how to learn. That's what I usually took from my best professors, and that's what you remember on how to do research properly. So when we teach methods, what we are actually teaching, you may teach a method that they will never use. And I actually had to learn 2 methods in teaching communication sciences that I've never used as a political scientist. I just don't do factor analysis, but they do it. I don't do t-tests, but they do it. So I had to learn it myself, and I had to teach it. But you learn where to find the information, and you teach the students where to find the information. And I remember that every time that I had teaching experience, and I had it a lot also in the previous stages of my studies, I always heard, like, you understand the things better when you have to teach them, because you have to explain it in the way that people understand it. And also here, coming back to these insecurities, what I usually do with the methods, I usually have a pre-course or in the first session a survey, so that I know where the students are starting from, because I know experience from the previous years that some teachers, some professors, they start too high up. And then you have bad feedback, then you have bad performance, then you maybe have to sit where for they're taking the exams. So in this case, if you have a chance, the first session is always for me where to get to know the class. If you have a chance, if you don't have 400 students, but even if you have 400 students, you just make a short survey and you see where they stand or what their motivation is. And quite often I hear in my classes, like when Trump was elected, my motivation was to understand why he was elected, like every second student. Because they were aware, not because of the subject. They have to take research design, but they can choose from 10 different classes. And you need to know why they were. If they are studying methods, quite often they also have a motivation to study methods, why we're here. So for them, it's, for example, obligatory course in the first year of a master's program, but there are still reasons. And I hear a lot of them, like personal experiences. I work in social media. I want to know how to use the statistics for my TikTok performance. So you need also to know what they are expecting from you. And for this, the preparatory first lesson is always a good way to find out. And then you can at least a little bit shape, coming back, like your examples, the data you use, and also try to engage the students using this. Because quite often when I ask something, I have people who worked outside of academia, especially if they're in masters, but I didn't know how it is in UK, even in bachelors in Vienna, most of the people are working in parallel. So they have some experience outside of academia, and quite often very advanced experience in, I don't know, social media and all this kind of stuff, and communication and journalism. So you can also bring in their examples, and they feel as a part of the class, then of course they're much more motivated to study still. Even if it's kind of boring statistics, they know how they're going to use it for themselves.
So I think just to say perhaps on the methods, you can also end up teaching qualitative methods, right? There's also need to teach that. Not everything is boring statistics. But to go back to this idea of balance, I think, and how do we get that balance between teaching and research? I think one of the key sites where you get that balance is when you attend academic conferences. Because you have, first, take a step away and go to some of the teaching and learning panels there. Because you will learn, I mean, you might even want to go to teaching and learning conferences, the best conferences around. Because you're going to learn, you're going to hear from people sharing their experience about how they taught this, and about methods on how, even how to divide kind of readings between students, a type of rethinking how you can make group work happen, and suddenly you've got ideas, and perhaps you had the most boring seminars as a student, and you don't want to inflict that on your students, and there you have tips on how to do it. So similarly, these are the kind of, you want to read also people. I mean, one of the way in which a lot of people are balancing teaching and research is actually they do research on teaching, right? And they publish on that. And that's also how you get to learn from and read from people in similar disciplines. So I think yesterday, coming to this, I was reading, there's this new paper just by Charlotte O'Brien on bringing EU law back down to earth, which is a brilliant paper, and it's open access on how to rethink how we teach EU law from a kind of PBL perspective, like a problem-based learning perspective. So it's very, very Maastricht friendly, this. But it's really good thinking whatever type of EU teaching you do, just really asking yourself important question about what kind you want to teach, and you're never going to be able to cover everything. So you have to make difficult choices, and it's okay, but embrace it and don't try to cram everything in. So I'd say, going to these kind of panels. It also, for me, just sometimes you go to a big international conference, such as UACES 2023 in Belfast, which I hope to see all of you at, and suddenly you're like, okay, well, I've chosen all my panels that are directly relevant to what I'm studying. Now, I know that next year I'm going to be teaching in this. So you go to the panels that also cover some of the thing you're teaching, and suddenly you don't have to do the reading because you have the person presenting that reading, and you can say, well, I'll add that to the syllabus, and it's already there. Or you've identified someone, you get to know them, you've identified someone that if you end up having to teach this, you know who you can reach out to. It's like, I have to teach, and I've had that number of colleagues saying, oh, well, you presented on the Common Agricultural Policy. I have to do a lecture on the CAP. Do you have slides? I was like, yes, sure, happy to. You will, the thing that seems to you the most boring or the most confusing topic is going to be someone's passion area that they'll be happy to share slides on. So I think, the kind of network you build in here, but at also conferences, will also be like people you can reach out to when it comes to teaching things that you're not super comfortable with. So a lot of that kind of human side of the research and the teaching, it's going to be the same people. So enjoy that and get to know each other, and so that you can use each other later on.
I think these are very good tips for, especially for the students, as far as I see from my experience. I don't know your experience, but most of them do not want to read the syllabus in detail, and that's why especially the Viviane's tips are very good to learn. Use your own research to adapt to being an interactive and also getting network building. I also like the Olga's point about encouraging them how to learn the research, because sometimes, because these are the students and they don't want to go in the understanding that you are going into this understanding. These are the differences as far as I understand. Also, Venice, I'm very happy to hear that change smartly in terms of the syllabus, in terms of presentations, because we are always, I think for me, we are always, as far as I see from my colleagues, we are always perfectionists about, we need to change for the next semester or next year, it is very interactive. But be careful about changing the things or adapting the things, such as the Brexit. Might be in one of your presentations, might be one of the topics that you are going to discuss in the week. Maybe you can change the interactive or changing things, not everything else. This is one of the struggling things for me personally. That's why I would like to thank all of you. And I would like to also be interactive about the audience and the speakers. If there is any other questions, it will be better for us to be interactive, to answer the questions.
No stupid questions, you remember.
And we are very inspiring, so I think, the questions will flow.
I already asked those questions, and you already asked most of the questions I had, especially for integrating our research to the teaching stuff by giving an example, being interactive, and also your own research even in the non-related topic, would be better. Yes?
Well, you can go first. You can go first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. My question is related to the belonging to a university. So is it possible to teach at one university or two different universities and research at another university, or how do you manage this diversity? Or maybe you stick just to one place? I don't know.
Shall we take a few questions?
Yeah.
No, you can take them off.
Yes.
Yeah. My question was with regards to kind of after PhD in terms of teaching. So I had a scenario I thought might be a best way to present it, in the sense that after you complete your PhD, you get a teaching position, but it's in an area completely not related to what you did at your PhD. I think some of them in the last panel talked about this. So my question was, how do you kind of balance this with academic research as well in terms of publishing? Do you need to take like a pause, a 2-year break, and focus on the course, the module, make sure you learn it, get the detailed understanding of it, and then you could go back to the normal academic life where you're publishing alongside teaching? Or is there a way to kind of balance it, maybe a fast track way to balance things more effectively?
Is there any other question?
There was one in the back of the
No,
room.
it was I think, this right?
Let's start with this way and then we can continue. I would like to also ask, because it depends on the contract to contract. Some contracts requires the teaching, some are not. You have been employed as a researcher, and after finishing your PhD, how you can adapt yourself to the teaching line without having any proper training. It's sometimes it's just like learning on the way, but many times not. I mean, how can we get the proper training education? Paying too much money, or being an observer in any other colleagues' class, or etc. Because not all of us situation are different. That's why I'm asking so general question.
Well, in terms of the belonging, shall I take a start? Okay, that's an issue of having multiple identities. Fine. The problem that you have there as a challenge is to be able to adapt your style to the requirements that you have in each particular institutions. So if you're coming from a research-led institution, but you actually teach in a teaching-oriented institution, then the kind of expectations are a little bit different. So that is a challenge. However, that doesn't necessarily require you to tone down or to dumb down the level at which you teach. One of the big points is that you need to kind of inspire students to go and do things on your own, and that doesn't change no matter if you are in a research-driven institution or a teaching-oriented institution. You are in Oxford or you are in a small college somewhere around England. It's the same thing. Students are students no matter what. So the belonging side, I wouldn't attach myself to a university. I would rather much belong to my students in that sense and be part of that community of people rather than think about where I'm teaching. Because every cohort is unique, every cohort has its own needs, no matter what the university may tell you or not. I mean, we had this issue, we recently had a new, I hope they don't have the automatic recordings here in this classroom. But we recently did a refresh of our education strategy and the education pillars. Okay, if you look at it, you could be freaking out, you know, like what the hell am I supposed to be doing right now? But if you actually think about it, it's basically the same thing branded in a different way with different words and fancier for marketing purposes. So it doesn't really make a difference as such, right? You keep some of those things already built into your ideas and you transfer it anywhere you go. And that's actually a good thing because you're also transferring different styles and different ways of doing things into other institutions. And that can make a difference to students because, you know, when everybody has the same mindset, then obviously things can get boring. On your question, I think that the idea is not to give up your research for 2 years because don't forget it, the train has gone and it's not coming back. Yeah, the idea is that you skill yourself up when it comes to project management effectively, right? You learn when your busy days are. You slot time out for preparing the teaching. You make sure that you demarcate some time out for your research and your research activities. You don't tone down, but you may want to find collaborators, for example, right? People who are working with you in a joint paper. You may want to push forward some sort of quick ideas, or you may just want to keep yourself up to speed with conference going and things like that, or reading. The problem that everybody will tell you about academia, in my view, is that, oh, we are so busy, we are working overtime, and that is true, okay. I'm not saying you have to accept that truth, okay, but you need to learn to balance that truth in order for it not to become too burdensome for you. And that is the same as when you do your PhD. The one advice that I got from my mentor in my PhD was to treat my PhD as a 9-to-5 job. I never stayed up all night writing stuff. Not worth it, man. Like really, not worth losing your sleep over this. So, you know, it's about managing and learning how to put things in order and to prioritize things that are important at one particular time over others that are not as important at that moment in time. Research is always a top priority, right? So it should be featured always somewhere there at the top of your to-do list. So, you know, it's a matter of balancing the different slots of time and pockets of time that you have and taking advantage of those pockets of time to do things. We can reflect on the context later on.
I mean, I think in terms of teaching in different places, I think there's questions of, are you breaking the law by doing that, right? We keep, every few years you've got a scandal of this professor was having 2 full-time positions at 2 different universities and was paid twice, you know. So don't do that, I'd recommend, you know. But it also depends, of course, you know, if you are in a place where it's geographically quite close and you've got lots of universities and they're looking for, like, you've got a part-time position and you've got another part-time, you know, that works. I mean, it's terrible on you, but at least it's legal. So I think, you know, don't get into a situation where people are questioning your professional practice, especially early on in your career. It's not worth it. Now, in terms of fast track to not losing your research when you're teaching too much, I'd be interested in finding that. For me, the solution has been co-authoring, because then you feel like you're letting your co-author down, and that means that you're at least doing something else. And ideally, you're co-authoring with someone whose term time are not exactly the same, so their downtime and your downtime are not exactly the same, so you can push something and then suddenly, you know, in 2 months they'll get back to you with their version of it, but these things keep ticking along. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely, there's things that I want to get back to and that I've still kind of stopped for the last 5 years. And, you know, you will never do everything. We keep always on having a new idea of research project. Not everything will pan out. Same with teaching. You won't make every changes you want to make to your teaching, especially not in 1 year. So I guess part of it is understanding that we can't do everything, and that's okay. And it's really being quite clear with yourself around what are the things that you really don't want to let go, and prioritizing clearly. Now, in terms of training, I think it really depends where you're doing your PhD, because in the UK you do have, at least from what I've seen, the different universities in the UK I've been, you do have quite a bit of training compared to, like, now some of that training can be terrible, right? And very much a box-ticking exercise. But at least for me, that was a good thing, because I had pretty good training in where I did my PhD, which allowed me to then be kind of an associate fellow of the Higher Education Academy, which also meant that I only had to do 2/3 of the formal teacher training when I started my lectureship job. And that teacher training at Queen's, I'm sorry, is not the most beloved thing. The acronym, when spelled out, sounds like pig shit, and people kind of call it like that. So, you know, so sometime doing a lot of that training and having your training recognized when you do things at PhD level, you know, it shows, like, you know, you've put together sometimes the university will help, sometimes it's something you have to do on your own, perhaps with your mentor or something, and get that associate fellowship recognized. That is something you can show in terms of teaching, that you take teaching seriously. You don't just have experience in a bit of teaching, but this has been recognized by a professional body. And it will also mean that you have less stupid admin to do that. And if the teaching training is fantastic, you can always go to more of it, you know. But if it's not, then you've already done part of it. So yeah, but I think, I mean, and that is one thing where we do have very big difference. I mean, we was at Lille at the last UACES conference, we were speaking with PhD students in France, and they said, you know, they're thrown in the classroom without any kind of pedagogical training before. And so I think that's also the kind of role for this kind of events, to kind of try to kind of show where you can find the resource. And actually on the UACES website, you do have some resources on how to design a course or this kind of thing. So look at what's already out there. And because if you haven't had any training, there is training available, or there are people who can point you toward that, and you should definitely not. I mean, I think it's okay. We've all done it, to perhaps, you know, teach one class or two without having really thought about how to teach. But the quicker you can get into kind of rethinking about how to do it, the better, the more confident you'll be at it, I think.
Okay. So I think also coming back to your question, to the first question, Ali, so it very much depends as well on which country you work in and what kind of contract you have. And I've known examples of people who were actually mostly doing their PhD and had no teaching experience, and they decided to become some adjunct lecturers somewhere. So in many cases, in many universities, you also have an option to apply with your course and propose a course and maybe teach one course or two, or maybe even teach a session somewhere, or a seminar. So where you have to, I think it's actually a very good example where you can grow your network, because if you are based in one university, we all know the university careers. I think in the UK it's a little bit more straightforward. I work in Austria. I have experience with German system and with Swiss system where I started, and I think you heard here that we don't have a permanent contracts for up until the last level. So basically we even have restriction of having non-permanent contracts at one university. You can maximum work for 8 years at one university nowadays. You can, with my contract, maximum 6 years. So you have to change the universities. And in this case, of course, if you have a chance to teach a course somewhere, then it's even a better option. You always have to look into your contract, of course, whether you are violating something. I think this legal side of is very important, especially if you go to teach something abroad. There is also a tax issue involved. So to make sure that everything works out, talk to HR. But if you have a chance, if you know that you can teach somewhere, I would rather, if you have a capacity, try to jump into it. If it's something what you like to teach, if it doesn't think about your time as well, if you can balance it. I think especially with hybrid teaching nowadays, there are quite a lot of opportunities where you don't really have to move physically and to teach something. So I think it's a good way of extending your network and getting new opportunities work-wise. But where, just to be on the sure side, don't overstretch yourself as well. And I actually, 2 weeks ago, I was in a seminar with colleagues from a similar lab in Munich, and I heard the words that I have never used before, but we are overcommitting in academia. So we are quite a lot of times we are saying yes, coming back to this learning to say no, so we are overcommitting. So please think how it's gonna impact your kind of schedule. Then I'm planning my teaching, coming back to this the second question, I think they connect nicely. When I'm planning my teaching, first of all, I'm usually asked when I would like to teach. I don't know about you, but you can decide. Or at least say that at some days won't work for you. And I'm trying to cluster my teaching so that I have the day when I have to prepare the teaching in the morning and I'm teaching in the second day. So I kind of have days that are my teaching days, and then I have my research days. And I used to have similar situation during the PhD time when I was assisting in the class. We had a day when we were teaching, and both for our professor and for us, it was the day when you are doing your teaching, so that you can prepare on that day. This is the full day for teaching. If you have this opportunity, try to ask and to combine, to do it in a way that you can do it. And I also had in my situation a course where I was it was boring teaching for me. It was a bachelor level teaching, and I found out in the second year of teaching it, of being asked to teach this course, that it's mostly taught by the PhD students. So then I had I don't know if you have it, but I guess you all have this kind of job talk once a year, review of your year, or you can talk to your supervisor and say, look, I have something more to offer in this field. And that's what I did during my yearly conversation with the department head, where they assessed how you're feeling. I said, I'm teaching this course, but I actually can teach more and more advanced courses and in different languages. Especially in our case, we have undergrad teaching is in German. Not everybody can teach in English. So I said, I can do the MA courses in English. And then they came back to me next year asking me to teach again the same course. And I said, but look, I can do more advanced stuff. And I got another offer of teaching more advanced courses. And even the year after, I got oh, sorry, we don't have anybody who is able to teach in English in the masters. Could you teach in the masters? And I said yes, because it's expanding your profile as well. So when you are teaching, think about it strategically as expanding your profile. If you can jump into the different levels of the courses, bachelor's, master's, then try to do it and be proactive if you have a chance to show your capacities, because people who are planning the teaching in our case, and I think in your case as well, they don't know your expertise. They don't know expertise of everybody. So you have to be proactive and say, if you have a chance on the feedback, I can do something more, or I would be interested to propose this thing. So do it. And also when you plan it, try, if you have influence on the timing, try to plan it in a way that you will profit. Because I ended up, for the last 2 years, I ended up even teaching once every 2 weeks. So I have teaching 3 weeks. If you have a chance to do block seminars, think about whether you can schedule it as a blocks. When you have, some activities, they all have our calendar with conferences and so on, and when if you have conference, of course we are dreaming about writing the papers very much in advance, but then imagine you have your teaching and when you have your paper for the conference, it's going to be very hard. So when you're planning your teaching and times, if you have an opportunity to influence the schedule, look into your own schedule. Look into the schedule you have for your semester, for your upcoming year, then you would like to have quieter periods. If you can schedule your teaching this way, do it, and at least try to talk. It depends on the university, but I think in many ways you might be able to influence how it's scheduled. And then once you scheduled it, you can have your research days, and I think it is the important thing to say, today is my research day, tomorrow I'm doing my teaching. And also to communicate this way to the students. As I said, yeah, you have to be open to the questions. But another thing I communicate all the time, I'm checking my email during the week. I'm not responding to the question during the weekend. And I'm checking my email 2-3 times a day. So if you have something urgent, please mark it as an urgent. I might be able to respond it, but I'm not accessible 24 hours as well. So this is another thing you should communicate, because otherwise you might have, depending on the students, you might have your mailbox also overwhelmed. So think about the way it works for you, because you are also, we said it today, you are not a PhD student, you are a PhD researcher. You are doing your research in the first place, and you need to think about the way it will work for you. And sometimes we are not aware that we can actually express our wishes when it comes to schedule or when it comes to the program. And then again, you can think about structuring everything in the way you would like to have it. And about the training, I think it's a very important issue. So my first degree was in languages, and I had quite a lot of methodological training. So I went to school to teach languages, and then I had classes at the university level. But then I switched subjects, and I always enjoyed teaching. And in our field, it's actually like, we're coming back to the balancing. The further you get, the more people say, like, you don't have to care about teaching. This is something you have to do, but it is not your priority. That's what I hear a lot. But I know that especially in the early career stage, many of us care about the teaching and the students, because some of us also have experience of bad professors. But also it comes back to your philosophy. So my philosophy, again, teaching philosophy, is that I'm teaching students who to think and to do something, and it is important to teach properly. So here I profited a lot also from the courses, and also from coming to the events. I think the first ones were like DTA here, but also we have a teacher's training at the university. It's not obligatory. What I find kind of fascinating in Austria, it's not obligatory. We have a teaching and learning center. They have lots of offers, especially nowadays with Zoom teaching. They always send out the proposals. We have this offer, we have offers on hybrid teaching and so on, but people don't really take advantage of it. First of all, if you go to these trainings, they are usually part of your working time. So usually, unless it's like today, usually like with us, we have to send a form of absence that we are going to a training. It's still your working time. And you are learning the methods and exchanging with people about methods that you can afterwards repurpose reuse in your practice. And another thing, you can always use Google, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. When I had to teach a very new course in the master's program, I just Googled how the different universities do it. What do they have in the syllabus? Because I had no slides from the previous professors. So here, don't try to do too much on your own. Look for the opportunities. I think with teaching and learning conferences, there is always teaching and learning summer school as well at ECPR. So there are many people here at UACES as well who are researching, teaching, and giving best practices in teaching. Always during the annual conference, there is also a panel or even a section on this. So there are opportunities for getting training. If you don't have it at the university, though I'm pretty sure you are able to get it at the university, just check another associations and opportunities. Because even if you think you don't need it, you will quite often still learn something you would like to use. And every time you go, you see the advances as well, because usually people who are in this field, they know about the newest things that come around. With the students, they work pretty well, because the students are also changing, and you can say, I'm getting like back to my student years and remembering how it was in my student years, but nowadays the things that we can use in the classroom, all the online opportunities for quizzes and so on, it comes across very well, because the students are also changing. So we need to know what is happening out there, what are the opportunities that we have, and what are the tools that we have that we can use, because they didn't exist when we were students, for example. So that would be my advice as well.
can we also do that for our supervisors or our colleagues to, to get much more experience, attending one classes to become a guest lecturer about our topic?
Yeah.
It would also help.
Yes, absolutely. The majority of PhD researchers that I meet do not necessarily have this kind of proactive mindset. They expect that teaching will be handed over to them. But I definitely agree with you that you need to push as well. So if you have an interesting course that is running in your department, and you think that you can contribute a session in X, go speak to the person who's convening that course and tell them, I would like to get some opportunities here, and we advise our students to do that, and we try to bring in the students in the classroom because it is a good opportunity to test drive an idea, and also to get back to the point of this session of integrating research into teaching, because effectively the students will learn from you that you are the expert on this topic, or you are researching this niche area, so they will hear it straight from you rather than having to go around it in circles. So the more you get that kind of experience, this guest sort of thing, I think is very interesting.
I think
yeah.
So some universities really don't like that. So some universities only allow PhD students to teach first years and only tutorials. And if you do, if you're going to be
not unsupervised, like you can be part of the
yes, but
classroom,
then
so
that
that's a double
means,
gig. So
that also means you're not going to be paid. So for a lot of these
one
cases,
session.
well, yeah, no, but I mean, it's we're in a situation where students, like PhD stipends are very low. We're in a cost of living crisis. You might consider that actually it's better for you to do tutorials where you're actually paid than spend a lot of time doing. So I think in terms of lectures, I think it is almost a tick box exercise, that it is good for you if you want to do a teaching and learning thing to say, I have given at least one lecture, I have taught, I have been guest kind of participant in at least one master's thing, but perhaps, concentrate on some of the things where you can also be paid for. Now it depends. I mean, when I was doing my PhD, I was able to be paid for the few lectures I gave, but I know that my own institution, it is very hard to get PhD students money. So we end up taking them for lunch after that, which is nice. But it's so it's more of a try to consider your time also, and not. I think we have to learn to say no and to not overcommit, and to say, okay, it is good for my CV to do a bit of this, but don't end up doing a lot of things that suddenly you won't be paid for.
And just add something before. So I had this example in the other class where I suggested one of my ex-student assistants, who is now a PhD student, to a professor to come as a guest lecturer. First of all, you have to suggest it and to make people talk whether they are willing to do it. For him, it was kind of win-win situation where professor couldn't teach this stuff. The PhD student has experience in this stuff because he's doing it for his PhD, this kind of web scraping thing. So it's a method that the professor doesn't know anything about. But for him, it was an experience because he has project PhD. Without teaching, it was kind of a teaching experience. So if you are asked to do it, think what it is in it for you. I had, before my PhD position, we didn't have any teaching, but we had an opportunity to get extra money because our salaries were lower than the teaching assistants by teaching. And in the last year, our professor said, if you would like to, you can be not a teaching assistant, but you can teach the whole lecture of your choice from our program. So my colleague took the topic that was his field of expertise. I took something that was interesting for me, and it was a good experience of teaching the whole class, not a part of the class like we did before with being assistants. So here, always think what is it in where for you and how much time you need to prepare and so on. So be considerate about your time as well. And if it's not working out, say maybe no, but maybe some other time, because the situation changed. Maybe you are busy at the moment, but leave the door of this opportunity open for yourself in case you are interested to contribute later.
In a polite way.
In a polite way, yes, in a polite way. So learn also to say no in a polite way so that opportunities still exist. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And I have another question. So if we're a guest lecturer and we teach about our research, but we still didn't publish the results, but we want to share them, but at the same time we don't want anyone to steal our brilliant ideas in this, or what we believe is so brilliant. But how do we make the people refer what they learn from us to us if we still didn't publish it?
It's tricky.
I think I have this situation all the time.
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
it is difficult. So there's
Yeah.
things like you might want to, you're working on something, you might want to kind of publish a blog on something that you can at least then refer to the blog and have the blog in the
Yeah.
list. But people are going to, like, if your idea is very good, people are going to steal it. And it's like, it happened. No, but I mean, it's like, and at one point it's like, perhaps it is actually not that worth it. You know, perhaps you can talk about it and you can, you know, flag that there's some interesting thing, but don't give all of your ideas
Yeah.
away. Like, really don't. And it happens, and, you know, plagiarism happens and all that. And this is like, you know, not everyone's behaving fairly in this profession. So do protect your stuff and make sure that it is. So I think a blog post where you've explained some things, where you can, you know, stake your claim to this idea and you be very clear that this is some kind of thing you're working on, can be a good way. But even then, don't like put your best idea in a blog post, because other people might just have the time to publish something on this before you're done with the public process. So yeah.
I mean, bring the research as an example, but don't necessarily give out the whole paper.
Yeah.
I mean, it's teaching
Yeah.
undergraduate students. They don't have to know the exact steps of your idea.
Yeah.
It's the essence of your idea that they need to find out. So yeah, okay, you can show them a regression table, great, but it's out of context. So, you know, no matter if someone takes a picture of it, they don't know what to do with it, right? So it's about being smart in the way that you use that research and the context that you put it in and the bits of that research that you are bringing forward, even if it is unpublished. You can always say that, you know, this is part of a wider project, and just highlight the one thing that you want as an example. You don't have to present it. It's not a conference paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's teaching a session.
Yeah. And speaking of conference paper, you might not want to upload versions of your conference papers.
Yeah,
It happens.
yeah. It has happened to all of us, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think actually I had, I have something in a pipeline that I am supposed to publish soon. And I was recently asked by a professor during a conference presentation whether he could reuse the stuff in the teaching. And I just said to him, I have it in my published, like in my written dissertation, but I would rather provide you with this thing once I have something published.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem, of course, every time you present in the conferences, he was like, oh, you know, it's such a nice scheme. I have never seen something like this. I would like to show this to my students. I said, you just have to wait. And if you are teaching, like when I'm teaching this topic to my students, I actually mentioned kind of bits of all the things that are already published, because of course I'm not reinventing fully the wheel, but I'm contributing and to what's existing there. And then maybe they don't know to need your idea at the moment, because it is something out where you have the right to protect what you are working on. It's kind of your intellectual property. So think about the way you can maybe bring the literature you use for this, or maybe even throw it in like a question or a topic for discussion, but don't provide them with all the bits. I think Theofanis is completely right. If they see a picture, you can say there is a work in progress on this, but you don't provide them all the bits together, because you never know who are you dealing with. And I think it's a problem in the conferences as well.
Yeah.
And it's actually the problem everywhere. And even within the colleagues, we all quite often have these situations when you share something and then you see somebody picking up on your idea. So be protective of what you're producing, especially if it is very important for you. I would rather use it once you have it in at least submitted stage or something.
Yeah, I remember also regarding my experience with my research, the part of it I presented to the undergraduates regard to one of my supervisors' class, and I didn't give so much details because I make it as much as general to give them the outlook. And if they can ask some specific questions, I can say, yeah, we can discuss later in detail and etc. You should also protect yourself while you are presenting the research. Although I was lucky not to get so much detailed questions, but I need to be be cautious about things, because which methods and which methodologies, how many interviews, qualitative, quantitative, because it goes on and on, and they can easily steal. Yeah.
But you can also present the foundations of your research, right? So before you actually show them your product, there is a literature that you built on, maybe there's a data set that you used from somewhere else, and demonstrate these other things. I mean, this is still research-led teaching.
Yeah.
It's just not from your research.
Actually, I had the problem because I presented at a conference and the professors were very much interested. Oh, how did you do this? How did you do that? And then, can you please give us the presentation? It's obligatory that you give it to us. And I was like, it's a little bit too much that you want to know about my way of research, because it's also your field of research and maybe you'd like to use this. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable because of their willingness to access. And it was not published yet, it was just in progress but close to the end, and
That can happen with teaching material as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people may approach and say, can I see your syllabus?
I think we have 5 minutes left. Any other questions?
There are a
If
few
there
over
are
there.
yeah,
I
you
think.
will-
couple,
Yes.
maybe we collect as well.
So, yes.
Such things happen now and then, but my question is, wouldn't it hinder science if we are going to hide our research? But maybe we can make a discovery from which whole mankind would benefit, and we are then going to hide some parts of it, and then it would delay for everyone the results. So there must be, what I wanted to say, there must be another way than hiding, like research results.
I think we explained the way, like publishing blog posts, making sure that your research is out there with your name, making sure that if there is a draft paper, it is uploaded on the conference website rather than any sort of obscure thing. If there is, because then obviously you can go back and claim that, this is my idea. But it's a matter of sharing with people that you don't know in a non-public way, if you see what I mean. So someone approaching you saying, this is very interesting. Can you share, your results with me, and I can check. No, that's equally dodgy as when they call you up on the phone and they say you had an accident and you claim car insurance. You don't drive a car. You see the signs, right? But sometimes it's very, very tempting to do that precisely because of the position someone has or the name that someone has. But then what I will tell you is also that academia is a small world. So, people who are using this practice, we usually kind of heard about that. Get your information right, know who this person is, and if you are to develop a relationship of trust with this person, make sure that you are included in the work that this person is actually doing, and you act as a collaborator, as a co-author. You can actually say, this is very interesting that you wanna share a publication with me. Do you wanna work on this with me, right? But I'm not giving you that.
Because otherwise you can run into experience I recently had when I, a few years ago, talked to a professor I wanted to work with as a postdoc, and a couple of years later I found out that he got an ECR grant for exactly the thing that I was thinking about doing in his research. And he never worked in this field, but he apparently got the ideas. And you never know who are you talking to, and even with your colleagues or your students, if you can trust people, whether you can trust people or not. So the position that we are in, of course, there is a position of power when you're talking to the professors and you're tempted to share something, but you should be really careful because you never know how it's going to work out. It's like a personal story, but when I saw the description of the project, I was like, that's what I wrote in my motivation letter. So it happens.
And also ask your supervisor
Yeah. If you are
if you are unsure.
if you're unsure and
And
if you have
if
a
you trust
trustful
them.
relationship
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
your supervisor.
Well, yeah.
If you trust them, it's the-
Yeah, because
There are many
I mean,
personal
you know, the
things.
the,
yeah.
the first culprit of this kind of abuse.
Absolutely.
It's
But there are people within the institution that can
Yeah.
help you, like a postgraduate research director, a head of department, someone, you know, like.
If you have them, or
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
look for people who can help you. Yeah. So where was the last question? I think.
One last question.
Yeah.
It was
The-
it was not a question, just a comment on her question. Many years ago, I was young enough to buy this offer, and I gave a professor my full written text.
Yeah.
What he tried to do was just to adjust it here and there, and he promised to be published on both names. But in the end, he couldn't do that because he realized that we had different languages, different references, and he couldn't come in my world to adjust the text. And that was it. I was happy, I got his comments, but he couldn't publish it. So it was win-win for me.
Yeah.
Good news.
But,
Yeah.
Let's take that last one.
Yeah, last one, I guess. Rob.
That's all right.
Okay.
I was going to ask a longer question, but because we're running up on time, Viviane, I wonder if you could tell me if there's anywhere I could read about teaching European studies in the future.
Yes, actually, there's a book coming out this summer on teaching European studies, and that some people in the room have contributed to as well. Yeah, so lots of good things, but also definitely come to Belfast to hear more about this. There's going to be lots of great panels there. And yes, I mean, the idea of the book is basically more of a textbook for teachers. It's like if you end up having to teach European studies, there's a chapter on how to do it from an IR perspective, from a policy perspective, from a comparative politics perspective, so that you know where to start for a lot of this, and that brings you up to the level in terms of lots of the very interesting stuff happening on the teaching and learning side. So yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you for that question, Niall. You're a good colleague. There will be a book launch, yes.
Might be we can get the Roberta's question.
It wasn't quite a question, it was just a comment, mostly two things from the discussion. One, people can have the same good idea. Different
Yes.
people can have
Yeah.
the same good
Yeah.
idea. So don't always assume bad actions
Yeah.
on others. And if they come to your panel, it's also because they may have very similar interests, may be reading similar literature, and also moving towards similar kind of ideas and conclusions. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that bad practice happens at all levels. Yes, there are questions of power between the senior colleagues and early career researchers, but I've also seen incredibly bad practice from ECRs, stealing ideas from senior scholars. This does not get flagged on Twitter because you don't want to punch down, but bad practice happens across all levels. And last but not least is to do with publications and outputs. And I hear the discussion about, if we have a finding that can improve our understanding of whatever, right? It is not a finding until it's published because it has to go through peer review. And I say that as a journal editor, right?
Yeah.
If you have findings that are not demonstrable and they are not able to be subjected to peer review, therefore evaluated for rigor, originality, and significance, then they're not findings. That's a view and an opinion. So that's the difference between a blog and a peer review publication. So if you have something that is really significant and is worth actually broadcasting to the whole world, be prepared to subject it to the peer review process, which can be brutal. Yes, there is review or two, they're not nice. But a lot of the reviewers, and I say this having read several reviews from people over the last 6 months, yes, there are some people who are really poor when it comes to reviewing practice. Most people are freaking outstanding, and they do so in addition to their work, and they will provide feedback on methodology, on analysis, on argument, and I think every time we put a paper through peer review, it's always better. So I think that it's important to kind of end on, because the push to publish and the push to publish in new formats, I think, is actually obscuring the fact that peer review still matters to a large extent, because our ideas need to be subjected to scrutiny by others. Otherwise, they're just ideas.
And being a peer reviewer is also a great
Yeah,
way
my
of
take is-
linking your research to your teaching,
That's
because
one
that
of
way
the
you do some of the readings and you know it's going to come out well, especially if the article is good, and you can add it a year later in your reading list and you already know it.
But don't reject the article and steal the idea.
Well, yes, you know, we're back to this, like, you know, don't, you know, try to build the field you want to see, and that also is about your practice. Yeah.
Thank you for your good insights and remarks and contribution to us. Really, I think for me personally, it will definitely help me, and for you, I hope it will help you too. Thank you, Viviane, Olga, and Theofanis, for your good insights and for sharing us the time on Saturday with your great experience. We'll be grateful. Really, thank you so much.